Assalamu alaikum. Today we are going to talk about the medial side of the cerebral hemisphere, where we can see the cut section of the brain stem. In this, what we can see is that the lowermost part is the continuation of the spinal cord. This is the continuation of the spinal cord into the medulla oblongata. So this part is the medulla oblongata. This is the pons, and this part is the midbrain. Above the midbrain, there are the basal nuclei and the thalamus and hypothalamus. So what we see here is the cavity of the third ventricle and the structures which we can visualize in that cavity. And above it is the fibers which are the corpus callosum. So from downwards towards the upper area, what we can see is that this is the spinal cord with the central canal. In the medulla oblongata, this is present as the central canal, and then this central canal opens into the fourth ventricle, which is present behind the pons, lower part of the pons and upper part of the medulla oblongata. So this is the cavity of the fourth ventricle. This is pons. Above the pons, this part is the midbrain, and in the midbrain, the cavity of the fourth ventricle, it goes towards the third ventricle as the cerebral aqueduct, which is present in the midbrain. In the midbrain, there are some structures that we can see. In front, there is a nerve, which is the oculomotor nerve, the third cranial nerve that we can see. This is the oculomotor nerve. Above the oculomotor nerve, we can visualize the mammillary bodies. Behind the cerebral aqueduct, the two structures that we can visualize are the superior and the inferior colliculus of the midbrain. This is the inferior colliculus, and this is the superior colliculus of the midbrain. Above it, there is a swelling which is called the pineal body. This pineal body, not very much visualized over here. This is the part which is attached to the midbrain, and here there is presence of a posterior commissure, and it moves upwards, and above the pineal body is the habenular commissure. Then we can see that this is the choroid plexus of the third ventricle. The blue and red part, this is the choroid plexus of the third ventricle. Above the choroid plexus, this white structure, this part is the fornix. Above it, there is a singular layer of cell which is called septum pellucidum, which separates the anterior horns of the lateral ventricle from each other. This is the septum pellucidum, and above the septum pellucidum, this part is the corpus callosum. And the corpus callosum has four parts. First part, which is not visualized here or shown here, is the rostrum, which is not present in this model. Then there is the genu of the corpus callosum, the body of the corpus callosum, and the splenium of the corpus callosum. When we said that this was the choroid plexus, beneath the choroid plexus where this attachment is coming from, this is the part of the interthalamic adhesion. So this part is the thalamus, and this is the interthalamic adhesion. When visualized from the cavity of the third ventricle, the thalamus and hypothalamus are separated from each other by this hypothalamic sulcus. So this part is the thalamus, this part is the hypothalamus, separated from each other by the hypothalamic sulcus. The fornix anteriorly has anterior commissure. Extending from the anterior commissure, this is the lamina terminalis. This is the optic chiasm. Beneath the optic chiasm, here almost, there is the hypophysis cerebri, and then the continuation to the midbrain, and this is the mammillary body which we saw earlier. The artery which we can see here is the anterior cerebral artery. So this cerebral artery is going to extend from the internal carotid artery, branch of the internal carotid artery. It moves over the corpus callosum and it supplies the medial surface and 1 inch of the lateral surface of the cerebral upper surface of the cerebral hemispheres. If we look at the inferior part or the brainstem as a whole, what we can see is that this is the medulla oblongata. This is the medulla oblongata with the nerves coming out of it. This is the pons. Here is the midbrain. What structures we can visualize here? This is the pyramid. This is olives, which are the projections of the medulla oblongata. Between the pyramids and the olives is the hypoglossal nerve. Between the olives and the inferior cerebellar peduncle, we get some nerves which are the glossopharyngeal and the accessory nerves. Between the medulla oblongata and the pons, we have the 6th, 7th and 8th nerve coming out of it. The anterior-most is the abducent nerve, then the facial nerve and then the vestibulocochlear nerve. They are coming out between the junction of pons and the medulla oblongata. In the substance of the pons, laterally there is the nerve which is the trigeminal nerve. The sensory and the motor part, the sensory part is larger and the motor part is just one nerve of the trigeminal nerve. Between the pons and the midbrain, anteriorly is the oculomotor, the 3rd nerve. In here, this part of the brain has some important structures coming out of it, which we have seen in the medial section, but here what we can see is that this is the olfactory tract, olfactory bulb, which is dividing into lateral and the medial stria. Between the lateral and the medial stria of the olfactory tract, here are the anterior perforated substance. This olfactory tract is present on the olfactory sulcus, and medial to it, this is the rectus gyrus, and this all part are the orbital gyri. Below it, this is the optic chiasm. The optic nerve is not shown here. Below the optic chiasm is the a little projection here shows the hypophysis cerebri, and this is the inside this blue structure. This is the mammillary bodies, and this part contains the posterior perforated substance. This is the internal carotid artery, which is dividing into middle carotid, which goes towards the lateral surface, and the middle cerebral and the anterior cerebral arteries.